These pictures were taken as a team of Marines landed inside a compound, capturing and killing Osama bin Laden. However, many people don't know that Osama bin Laden is not the mastermind of this attack, which does not diminish his involvement in the attack, but the mastermind was someone else. In this video, we look at the life of the actual mastermind of this whole operation, the forces that shaped him, and how some of these forces may still exist in the parts of the world he came from. Let's get started.
And the people who knock these buildings down will hear all of it soon.
Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I fear no evil.
This just in, you're looking at some.
Right here is the exact moment when George Bush was informed of a plane crashing into the World Trade Center. Neither him or anyone informing him knew how this very moment is going to reshape millions of lives across not just America, but the world. Soon enough, the towers on fire, people evacuating, and the chaos on Ground Zero was all over the news. And it was very clear that Al-Qaeda and its head at the time, Osama bin Laden, was behind these attacks. It took a little over a year for CIA to finally identify Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, or KSM as he got to be known, as the principal architect of this attack. You see, if Osama bin Laden liked being the face of his whole movement by being on these tapes and whatnot, KSM was the opposite. If anything, he liked to hide in the shadows. He'd rather not be known. And that is perhaps one of the reasons why a lot of the people across the world still don't know who the mastermind for these attacks is. Let's try and understand who KSM is and what really shaped him into this ruthless murderer and a terrorist. I will be referring KSM as Khalid or KSM throughout the video, so don't get confused. Let's carry on. Towards the end of the 1950s, Khalid's parents moved from Pakistan to Kuwait. This was right before the oil boom that Kuwait was soon going to experience. A lot of people from the Middle East were moving into Kuwait in the hopes of benefiting to some extent and giving themselves a better life. I mean, the oil boom did happen. Over the next decade or so, Kuwait's GDP took off. People's living standards and income increased drastically throughout the country. The local Kuwaiti population was getting rich and experiencing a better life. However, the migrants and their families, including KSM's family, were seeing very little or practically no benefit from this oil boom. You see, even before this oil boom, there was a very clear divide in the Kuwaiti society. There were the local Kuwaitis and then the migrants. To the local population, these migrants were nothing more than Baidoons, a word that can be loosely translated to people who are stateless or nomads. You see, this increase in wealth for the local population just deepened and widened the gap that already existed in the Kuwaiti society. Being a Baidoon was just the harsh reality for KSM's family. As young Khalid is experiencing this life of inequality and being a second-class citizen, there were two more factors that were at play in the Kuwaiti society at the time of his upbringing. Remember how I said there were a lot of people moving into Kuwait? A good chunk of these people were moving from Palestine, especially people who were displaced by the Israeli occupation of Palestine. This made Kuwait the center of Palestinian political activism. The idea of Israel being the enemy of all was kind of all around him.
Israel and the United States have been partners for 40 years.
Israel is a beacon of democracy in a sea of violence and hostility.
America, being one of the biggest supporters for Israel, was looked at as an enemy, or at least with suspicion by many. Other than political refugees, Kuwait had a sizable presence of Muslim Brotherhood, a party that was founded in Egypt. The Muslim Brotherhood was founded as a response to this growing unfairness, where a certain section of the society is living the life, meanwhile the rest of the people are literally suffering. One of the key beliefs of this party was to go back to a stricter interpretation of Islam and follow Sharia law. Even though Muslim Brotherhood was banned in most of the Middle Eastern countries, its members were everywhere and they would monitor mosques and find chances to persuade people towards their cause. Khalid's brother was one such person who got persuaded into joining Muslim Brotherhood. And following his brother's footsteps, Khalid followed soon. At the young age of 16, Khalid was already part of the Kuwaiti chapter of Muslim Brotherhood. All Kuwaitis were given government assistance to pursue further education. However, that wasn't the case for the Baidoons, since they were considered stateless. For KSM's family, they could only afford sending one of their children for higher education. And Khalid, being one of the brightest one in the family, was the chosen one. He was enrolled into a college in a small town in North Carolina. He was bullied and suffered through racism in this small town. And things weren't different for other international students or anything. They were suffering the same shit. It wasn't like they were just picking on KSM or anything. According to Khalid, it was his time in America that made him realize how Americans are just a bunch of degens and racists. His view on America was starting to take shape, however, he was yet not fully radicalized. Once he finished his education in America, he went back to Kuwait in order to get a job. When he couldn't find a job in Kuwait, he decided to move to Peshawar, Pakistan, a town located very close to the Afghan border. He started working for a charity where his brother already worked. This charity was supporting the resistance forces that were fighting against Soviet Union in Afghanistan. And at the time, a lot of weapons and money was being pumped into Afghanistan by America, and the preferred mode of distribution was through Peshawar, Pakistan. This meant the city was full of spies and American diplomats. Other than spies, the town was full of influential people, at least influential to KSM. Among them was Abdullah Azam, the Palestinian who essentially created the notion of radical jihad. Another person in town was Al-Zawahiri, a person with an Egyptian background who had founded his own Islamic jihadist movement within Egypt. He would later on go on to be the second in command of Al-Qaeda. And of course, one of the other influential people in town was the first in command of Al-Qaeda, that is Osama bin Laden. All of these men were at the forefront of creating the idea of a war against infidels and war against America. KSM still had a somewhat favorable view of America. After all, they were providing weapons and money to the Afghan resistance against Soviet Union. However, this was all going to change in a few short months.
Заявление советского правительства. Действуя в точном соответствии с Женевскими соглашениями, СССР завершил вывод советских войск из Афганистана.
You see, as Soviet Union started to pull out of Afghanistan, so did America. A lot of the resistance fighters felt like America had abandoned them. They were used for their own benefits by both America and Soviet Union. Meanwhile, they didn't give a flying fajita about what happens to Afghanistan after the war. It seemed like there was no effort put in to set up a government or stabilize Afghanistan after this war, at least on the part of America. Soon these resistance groups started fighting within the country, pushing Afghanistan towards instability and a bunch of infighting. Pretty much around the same time, Azam, the influential person that I mentioned previously, the founder of radical jihad, was killed in a car bombing. And soon enough, there were rumors that CIA was involved in the killing of Azam. It was believed that CIA killed him on the behalf of Israeli government since Azam wanted to start a resistance movement against Israel back in Palestine. Finally, in the 90s, America announced a bunch of military and economic sanctions against Pakistan for testing its own, for having a nuclear weapons program. That's what they were sanctioned for. A bunch of people in Pakistan were like, what the fuck, dude? Double standards. Considering you have your own nuclear weapons, who the fuck gives you the right to go, sanctioning us? Meanwhile, KSM took this as a further proof that America was quote-unquote done using them, both Afghanistan and Pakistan. Now they don't have anything to do with them, so they're just sanctioning them. There were numerous factors at play throughout his life that were taking him towards being a radical, but it was towards the end of the Afghan-Soviet war that really radicalized him. That's it for this video. I don't want it to be a super lengthy video. In the next video, we see how he went from being a charity worker to being someone who carried out one of the biggest attacks. But I'll give you a bit of a conclusion. If you've had a tough life and if you've gone through some tough shit, go see a therapist, bro. It will help. Life is very unfair. There's things that a lot of people suffer through. But in this next video, we'll look at how he went from being radicalized to planning and executing the 9/11 attacks. If you've liked this video, you can watch one of these videos. One is about the World Trade bombing that happened before the 9/11 attacks, which was done by Khalid, Sheikh Mohammed's nephew. And the second one is about Democratic Republic of Congo, how the mineral richest country in the world suffers the most, and a whole bunch of kids are suffering there. There's a charity link to that video. I would suggest you donate something. I'll see you next week. Peace, bye.